skills, kinds of changes, there's the sort of the science and the curriculum content and approaches and changing, but so many of the solutions are going to lie with different kinds of relationships and the emotional intelligence that young people and leaders need to be developing. And this is true across the piece with the different global goals. But I wonder if is social and emotional learning a specific area of any of your works?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, first of all, I appreciate the work, I just want to say, of Salzburg Global Seminar in leading our understanding and bringing multiple sectors together to understand and address issues like social emotional learning. And so I think you're an amazing resource for information in this area. The Smithsonian, and through our Smithsonian Science for Global Goals project, because of the work of the Global Seminar, I just want to say, Salzburg Global Seminar, has drawn heavily on the important role of integrating social emotional learning into science education and civic engagement, this idea of shifting people, young students' behavior to address these sustainability issues. At the foundation of our work is the fact that we know that CASEL has come out with, and I'll put a link to it in the chat, the competencies around social emotional learning, one of which is self-awareness. So in our work at the Smithsonian, we often have students, before they dive into better understanding an issue on a local perspective, a local community perspective, is we have them engage in self-awareness. So creating an identity map to understand how do they view themselves, and then engaging in social awareness, looking at the identity maps of others to see similarities between themselves and their young colleagues, or even adult others, so scientists or teachers. We also have them engage in perspective taking. So this idea of understanding that we can't address these complex global issues that we're talking about today just by looking at it from a scientific perspective or an environmental one. They also need to be looking at that issue from an economic perspective, a social or cultural perspective. There are many different ways that we should be looking at these issues, and social emotional learning, by integrating into either teacher training or curriculum materials or instructional materials or our educational systems, by integrating social emotional learning, we're teaching students to develop and engage in perspective taking. And that helps to build on what Diane talked about, which is we need to help to develop leadership skills in students when they're very young. And much of that is around decision making. So if we can help students understand that when we make decisions, we have to think about them not just from our own identity, but from our understanding of others, or from multiple perspectives, that's just one example of how you integrate social emotional learning into the teaching and learning of these complex sustainability issues.
This is a great week to be talking about social and emotional learning, because it's always a great time to talk about it, but particularly this week because the OECD published on, I think it was on Tuesday, their 3-year study into social and emotional skills across multiple different countries. It's a really interesting piece of research and is going to help move the field forward, I think.
I just have a quick comment on that. Yeah, I do. I just want to say that something we sort of don't think about so much, and something we do a lot of thinking about in our organization is, when does social emotional learning begin, right? And we know that actually that begins at birth. It's how a child is born into the world, and how we sort of treat that child, how we nurture, how we care, how we hold that child, how we speak to that child, right? Is engaging them and sensitizing them to the world around them. That will either be a world that they feel accepts them or rejects them. It gives them the foundation that they're going to need for empathy and compassion and connecting with others. So we do a lot of talking about sort of that infant stage of life, and how that immediate sort of connection to the world and how a child is treated and nurtured actually begins to open up sort of some pathways to healthy social emotional learning later. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. And it's also, it's going to be a big topic for WISE at the summit in Doha in December. So there'll be a number of really interesting social and emotional learning and connected themes there. So it's something to look out for. And it's obviously, a critical component of Generation Unmute discussions. I'd love to get your kind of collective expertise on where you think the research needs to go next in order to, from all the work that you're doing, what are the gaps that you're seeing, and what do we need more of to help influence institutions to pay more attention to this topic in terms of what they teach, how they teach it, and who teaches it. So maybe Carol, or Jamil, if you would like to go first. What are the research gaps that you're picking up on at the moment, and what do we need to see more of?
So I would say that, one of the areas is this idea of community science, using methodologies that include practitioners in the study of the impact of teaching climate change or other sustainability issues in schools. In other words, one of the challenges with research, education research, is that the questions are dictated by the researchers. And yet the work that we're doing in educating youth on sustainability issues is just the opposite, that it's at the community or local level in which we are driving much of the learning and much of the action or behavioral shifts. And so the research has to follow suit. And so I think, one is, I would say, just the methodologies of research, and educational research at least, should engage the practitioners in the development of the questions that will be asked and addressed through the research, and the methodologies that will be used to collect that information, so that we can build capacity, research capacity within our communities. I think the second is that we have to take a much more transdisciplinary perspective on the research that addresses issues of sustainability education. So you heard Anna at the beginning, she talked about interdisciplinary perspectives, and this framework around transdisciplinary learning and teaching. We also have to create transdisciplinary approaches to research so that multiple sectors are coming together, like what you described, Dominique. So it's when you're studying the impact of educating youth on sustainability issues, that you're also engaging in looking at outcomes that are based on social emotional learning, cognitive outcomes, as well as behavioral, that the research is not just looking at the cognitive outcomes, but is integrating the social emotional outcomes as well with the behavioral outcomes.
Fabulous. Thank you, Carol. Jamil or Diane, would you like to add?
Yes, I think she has made a very pertinent points. One small point which I would like to make here is that building on all the points that our colleague made, we must also create learning systems that guarantee the acquisition of the relevant skill sets that are for future job markets, because that will be important. The scope for the new jobs should tailor in the sustainability factor into it, so that when we train students, when we educate students, they go to the disciplines that will ensure, that will guarantee them jobs in the market ahead. There are, especially in poor countries and developing countries, disciplines which are redundant, where students spend a lot of time studying, but when they find themselves without jobs when they qualify. So this aspect, I think, also needs to be tailored in. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamil.
Yeah, and I'd just like to sort of maybe bring that all together by saying, the research sort of on how education for sustainable development or global citizenship or sort of changes how adults interact in the world, certainly how children are shaped, but how adults act in the world. It's because it's a fairly, in some ways, right? It's a fairly new field. So the research does exist, but we haven't been able to sort of bring that together to a point where we're really looking at it comprehensively and sort of measuring again, what does this mean, right, for climate change action, for example. We also have a lot of research on these, 21st century skills and all the skills that we know are important, sort of critical reasoning, critical analysis, communication, collaboration, media literacy, all these things. I would like to see is sort of how we look at all the work that's sort of been put into research, that's been put into sort of 21st century learning, how that translates over into now this sort of urgent issue of education for climate action. So that's something that I think is sort of a little bit of a gap there, that we're sort of still seeing sort of segmented kinds of pots of research on various human rights-based education and various sort of areas, but we're not bringing that together to say, what does that mean for students and how sort of competency goals development for climate action.
Thank you, Dan. I think it's a really important point, isn't it, about the kind of global citizenship vector in all of this, which in many ways builds strongly on social and emotional learning type practices. And yeah, how do you make sure that the human connection and that this is as Jamil said at the very beginning, that this is a planetary problem, that there needs to be much greater cooperation around addressing. With that in mind, I'd like to ask one final question to you, please, which is really around influence. And what do you each think we need to do more of to influence institutions which hold power and have the capacity to affect significant change around this topic? So if you had, the kind of dreaded panel magic wand type question, but if you could make one change, where do you think we should be directing energy and effort in order to influence powerful institutions that can, that hold a lot of resources and could help move this field forward? Jamil, you unmuted, so perhaps I could come to you first, please.
No, that's the cue, then let me go for it. Yeah, I think this is, as we said, a planetary issue, a global issue, and all of us have a role to play. So what I wanted to emphasize is this will require both a top-down approach, but also a bottom-up approach. We have discussed today how we can empower youth, we can empower schools, we can give more resources to universities and to teachers, how we can develop leadership from the bottom. At the top also, we have to make sure that our actions are contributing to the overall objective that we have all set for ourselves. And in that sense, in the last decade of action, as I called it for SDGs, we have to make decisions from all perspectives. We heard economic perspective is an important one. We know, one smaller point which was raised by a student in discussion with us some time ago was how the universities can also take the lead from the leadership point of view to review their investment portfolios of how to support sustainability from that end. And then force the communities also, force individuals, force private sector to look into the broader aspects of sustainability to support the youth for a better future. We have to reduce carbon. We know we are in a fix now. Global warming is affecting all of us. Air pollution is denying access to schools to many poor people. Pollution of water is a health issue, which is denying the right of education to millions. COVID-19 has resulted in dropouts of millions of students from schools. So all these issues will require an approach which can support the implementation of actions which are towards sustainability and which also contribute meaningfully in the short time frame that is available to us. We don't have the luxury of time anymore in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamil. Carol or Diane? Yeah, Carol.
Yeah, so I would, it's interesting because I think that there are two different ways always to tackle these problems, and that is a top-down approach and the other is a bottom-up approach. But there's also this kind of 360 approach, which is that each of us, no matter where we are, can make a difference. And I think that's one of the themes from today, is that we're talking about this global local interconnection. Historically, in education, changes within schools have been driven by national policy, national standards, national curriculum, and that then trickles down into the schools. But what we're seeing, I think, right now as it relates to climate action is just the opposite. Many of our own young students are saying, I don't want to learn science in this way anymore. I want to be able to understand what's happening. Why are there fires burning across the globe? Why is it that the earth is warming? What is it that I can do to make a difference? And so what we're seeing right now is that young students are saying, I'm not waiting for the policy briefs anymore. I'm not waiting for the broad organizations to set standards or curriculum for the nation. You as a teacher and us as students, we have to drive this change. And so we're starting to be responsive to that. Now, I'll put an article in the chat, which shows that in the US, we have a long way to go. That, there is, for the first time ever, a set of standards in the US, which includes climate change education, but we still have about a third of the nation's teachers, as well as classrooms, that are not addressing it directly. And so I do think that listening to the voice of our youth is probably a new way of thinking about the way policies or directions are set within a region. But I think today on this issue, youth are really helping us recognize its importance.
Definitely. Thank you, Carol. And thank you for all the links that you've been sharing in the chat as well throughout. Diane, the last word to you, please.
Thank you. So it's really interesting to think about this. I really agree with what Carol's saying a lot, is that this is really amazing how much of the push, right, for climate action has come from young people today. And we've seen many examples of that worldwide. So that's going to be really important because teachers and leaders are going to have to be sort of interfacing with students in a different kind of way, right? Many students are very strong on advocacy for this issue. So we're going to have to do some thinking about that and preparing our teachers to be sort of facilitators of the conversations that young people are having around this issue, and helping them then to understand the appropriate ways to take action and how they can be a sort of driving change within their community. They have power, right? Let's help them feel empowered and help them to drive change in their community. And COVID was really interesting. It was the first time that we had all experienced sort of a worldwide kind of catastrophe, all experiencing it at the same time. We know there are tragedies that happen day to day around the world, but this was something we all had in common. So I think for moving sort of in institutions forward, we've really got to do a better job of having these institutions come together and find what we call common ground. When we get people into rooms and they talk about how is it affecting your institution? How is it affecting your organization? How, as a funder, do you want to respond to this? Finding common ground on this issue is going to be incredible. And we know that it's not just COVID that's going to impact us all. These climate changes do not see borders of nations. They are cross-border and cross-continent, and we've got to find better ways to understand how we all come together to do that, which is really communicating much better. Again, having those conversations around what's our common ground? Why is this a problem for so many of us? And how is it affecting and impacting our lives? And then finding those areas of consensus and moving forward a common agenda on climate action. And I know we've had so much movement around that. We have COP26 coming up, but taking more opportunities to find places where we can talk, discuss, and find ways to take action. And that can happen again from local to global levels. It can happen for each one of us. So that individual action and how that collective individual action can create collective impact on this issue is going to be critical.
Fantastic, Diane. Thank you very much. That was a really, I think, a very strong way to finish this discussion. I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to do a very quick recap of some of the key themes which I think have come out of the discussion. So what feels like a very, very long time ago, although it was only about an hour and 20 minutes, Buthaina kicked us off with some really excellent opening remarks, highlighting some of the great work that Qatar Foundation is doing around this topic and some of the different initiatives that they are involved in, and how they have put education and sustainability at the very heart of a lot of their programming. And this will be reflected in a really interesting body of work coming up over the next few months as we get closer to the Doha Summit and WISE in December. Jamil then gave a fantastic set of opening remarks talking about the breadth of the UN work to support this agenda, and particularly highlighting the interconnectedness of the different SDGs, and obviously SDG 4 and SDG 13 for our specific series of conversations this week, and made the point that several of us have quoted during the subsequent discussion about this being a planetary issue and something that we need to be working much more closely together in order to look for new solutions and then implement them. Carol then talked about some of the amazing work that the Smithsonian Centre for Science Education is doing and shared some fantastic resources around some of their global curriculum development work, and the sort of really powerful case studies of the triangulation between what you learn in high school or in your science courses, how you can apply that locally to address the local manifestation of sustainable development goal challenges, and then the kind of wider skills beyond the technical knowledge that are needed in order to implement them. And then Diane talked about some of the great work that Childhood Education International has been involved in, different ideas around leadership, the importance of new capabilities being discussed in future leader development, some of the great work around transformative leadership and how important that is, and how these frameworks already exist, these models already exist that will help equip current and future leaders with the kinds of skills and mindset that they're going to need in much greater abundance than we currently see if we are to have significant chance of addressing these topics. We then had the chance to discuss some really great questions that came in from the audience, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to bring all of them to the attention of the panel, but some really interesting reflections on lessons from the pandemic that can help us think about system and institutional and individual resilience moving forward, and also preparedness. Some really welcome discussion around social and emotional learning as a critical vector, or social and emotional skills as a critical vector in any successful implementation of these new approaches. Some excellent ideas about where the research could go next around interdisciplinarity, around community science initiatives, and again, global citizenship in 21st century skills. I would like to thank the three of you enormously for sharing so generously of your time and expertise. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you all and to be part of this opening session for this UN General Assembly series of discussions looking at climate and sustainability and education. And finally, I'd like to thank Qatar Foundation and the Qatari mission to the UN for the opportunity for us to surface these different topics. And I will now hand back to Anna Rold from Diplomatic Korea. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you to all of our panelists today. What an informative discussion. What a wonderful way to kick us off for this series, to start with very, very concrete ideas. I want to remind everyone that this is just the first day of 4 very, very interesting forums that we have organized together. So we have each day at the same time, 9 a.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Doha time. We aim to cover a wide variety of time zones this way. Our forums are going to be about an hour and a half each, following the same format that we had today. Tomorrow, Monday, at the same time, we will explore new models of impact investments in EdTech, featuring leaders from the World Bank Group, MasterCard Foundation, and the World Innovation Summit on Education. We will look forward to discussing growing trends of impact investors who have begun working on investment strategies that deliver both financial returns and also advance on solving towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Then on Tuesday, also at the same time, we will continue our series with a discussion on youth and decision-making, featuring leaders from Educate Lanka Foundation, the Digital Citizen Fund, the Amal Alliance, and WISE. Since the coming generation of young leaders will be the ones that will be tasked with the burden of managing some of humanity's biggest crises, how can we truly include them in decision-making now? And this is a topic that we touched upon today, and we'll dive in even deeper with youth representatives on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, for our fourth and final session in the series, we will look at how digital credentialing and recognition systems will broaden the range and quality of learning opportunities. This is something that came up in the chat today as well. The world is changing. So leaders from MZ Burning Class, Bright Hive, T3 Innovation Network, Weaving Lab, and Kaplan will give us insights on the brave new world of the skills economy, micro-badging, and micro-credentialing. We hope you will join us for this four-part forum and leave with renewed ambition and more tools like you did today for solution making towards the SDGs. Because as I mentioned earlier today, and it was mentioned throughout the discussion, the Sustainable Development Goals are not just the business of heads of states at the General Assembly. The SDGs are everyone's business. Thank you again today for spending time with us, and see you again tomorrow.